Awesome. So the voice you are hearing through your speakers is my voice. I'm Dr. Lemakis, and I am going to be your instructor for this awesome Psych 101 course, Introductory Psychology, this spring. This morning, in the next hour, we're going to really try to accomplish two things. Number one, we're going to make sure that you guys are aware of how the course will work. So what my expectations are, what the assignments are, how the grading will work, all the various component parts of the course will be reviewed with you guys over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. The second thing I want to accomplish this morning is to actually begin talking about psychology, talking about some of the topics that will be on our radar this spring as we work our way through this course together. So you obviously have navigated successfully to the live online session. So as you know, on Thursdays we will always be online, and then on Tuesdays we will always be face-to-face. So each Thursday there'll be a new link off of the button on Blackboard that says Thursday live online session. So next Thursday, for example, it will say Research Methods Part 1. So the way that you got here today will be the same way that you'll get here every Thursday going forward, okay? Within Collaborate here, we've got various tools to be able to communicate with each other. There's actually a video button. I just got my picture up there right now, but if I turn on the video, I can wave to you and you can see that there's actually a live person. So that's cool. I rarely use the video because it's kind of weird. In addition, up above the list of names, there's a little emote icon that gives you everything from smiley face all the way through slower or faster. There's a button that is a picture of a little hand. That's what you'll use to raise your hand if you should have a question. Down below then is the chat box area. I basically just ask you guys to reserve the chat box for questions and answers. I don't want you chiming into the chat box saying, I'm sitting here in my jammies, or I'm eating a burrito, or where are you guys going tonight? Those sorts of things. The chat box should be for course relevant conversations that we have, okay? I'm giving you my phonetic pronunciation of my last name because that Lithuanian last name is not an easy one for folks to pronounce, so it's Lemakis is how you pronounce it. If I mispronounce any of your first or last names, I'll apologize now. But I've been dealing with that myself my entire life, so I know what it's like to have people hammer your name, first name or last name. So why don't we just begin by going over some of the basics of the course and ways to contact me and things like the textbook and online quizzes and all that sort of stuff. And as we go, I will certainly stop and see if you guys have questions. Everything that we're doing today and every Thursday online is always recorded, so if you need to go back and listen to something again or you can't be here for some reason, there's no problem with that. Okay, as I said in the introductory email and announcement on Blackboard, there are no points connected with these Thursday live online sessions. So you can use these however you see fit. If you prefer to log in at 8 o'clock and that works well for you, great. If one week you can't do that and you need to watch it over the weekend, that's fine. Basically, as long as you are there live or watching the Thursday recordings before we get together face-to-face on Thursday, then you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, okay? That's an important message that I want to get across to you guys. Is the Thursday sessions, I'm assuming that you're doing them when you roll back into the classroom on Tuesday, and I'm just going to pick up where I left off on Thursday when we begin on Tuesday, okay? So you have to stay on top of it in that way. All right, here is my contact information for you guys. I'll tell you right off the bat the very best way to contact me is via email. I'm pretty quick to respond to those emails, so mlemakis@mail.stsu.edu. Let me tell you now on the front end that if you do get an email response from me that is short, terse, to the point, it's not because I'm angry about anything. It's probably because either, number one, I've gotten a million emails that day and I'm just trying to get through them all, or number two, even more likely, I'm at some practice or game and I'm responding on my phone and just trying to get you a timely response. So please do not misinterpret a short response as one indicating that you've annoyed me in somehow. Does that make sense? Does everybody get that? Okay, that's important because I do a lot of quick responses, a couple words, a sentence or two. I'm not a guy that's going to send you 3 or 4 paragraphs in an email. Okay, that's just not how I use that tool. My office, for what it's worth, on Tuesdays for office hours is in Life Sciences South, room 153. I have another office on campus, which is where this phone number is right now. So if you were to dial that number right now, please don't do that. You would hear a phone ringing in the background, and that's another way to reach me, although most students, again, use email. My office hours are on Tuesdays face-to-face after our face-to-face class from 11 to 12 in that Life Sciences 153 office. I'll tell you, that's the only time that I'm in that office. Okay, so Tuesdays from 11 to 12 is the only time I'm in that office. If you pop in there at any other time, someone else is likely to be in there. It's a shared office. Okay. On Thursdays, after I'm done with my 9:30 class at around 10:45, I'll turn right back around and have an online office hour available to you guys. And you'll see a button on Blackboard that is empty right now that says Thursday online office hours. And basically, it's just a collaborate session. If you wanted to pop in and ask me a quick question about something, we can do that live online from 11 to 12 on Thursdays. If you prefer just to email me those questions, that will work just as well. All right? Any questions about how to contact me best? I'm going to see if you're paying attention. What's the best way to contact me? Tell me in the chat box. Awesome. Yes, email. I know email's for old people. I've got a junior in high school, and I know he almost never reads the email that he gets from school. That's fine. That's the way you're going to hear from me, and probably best get responses from me. All right. Well, let's talk about the textbook. The textbook, shockingly, is called Psychology for this introductory psychology course. The authors are Lichtall and Valentine. It's a new book. It's in its first edition. It's important that you read the textbook because basically the story is I can't cover everything, for example, in the section on learning or in the section on memory or in the section on the biological basis of behavior. You need to supplement what we do in class, whether that's face-to-face or online, with the reading that you do in the textbook. And the good news is I'm going to incentivize that textbook reading. I'm going to give you points for reading the textbook via these Learning Curve online quizzes that we're going to talk more about in just a couple of minutes. Okay? The entire course, by the way, is built in such a way as to give you points for things that I know will help you learn. So, I give you points for reading the textbook in the form of online quiz points because I know that reading the textbook will help you learn. I give you points, as you're going to see in just a couple minutes, for attending class and participating in class when you're there each Tuesday in the face-to-face meetings. Why? Because I know if you attend class and you participate, that's going to help you learn. So I give you points for that, right? The whole course is set up in a very behavioral way where rewards in the form of points are given for the behaviors that I know will lead to more success in the course. Okay? It's a great textbook, and you can either buy the physical textbook or the ebook only. So let me just go through the options here for textbook purchase. In the bookstore, you have the option of going there to the bookstore and buying a book plus a code. Okay? Or you could go to the bookstore and buy just a code. Or you could go online and just purchase access directly right there online. Okay? And I've given you information about how to get up and running with what's called Launchpad, and that was included in an announcement on Blackboard that was also sent to you guys via email. Okay, so 3 options. You go to the bookstore and you buy the book with an access code. You go to the bookstore and buy just the access code, or you go online and make your purchase directly online. Whichever of those you prefer is fine with me. Whichever of those you choose, you will have access to the ebook in Launchpad, and you will have access to the online quizzes that you will be doing all semester long. So it doesn't matter which of those 3 routes you choose. Probably the cheapest is to go directly online and purchase access there. And if you were to do that, you can follow the instructions that I sent you guys in the announcement and email that's on Blackboard. Let me stop there for a second. Any questions about the textbook at all? If you do, All you have to do is click on that little hand up above the list of participants. When you do that, your name will pop to the top of the list, and then I'll be able to call on you and get things cleared up for you. Okay? All right. Well, let's roll on then and talk about Launchpad. Launchpad is the online backbone of the course from the publisher. The publisher is Macmillan for your textbook. On Launchpad is where you'll find an interactive ebook. That means it's an ebook that you can highlight, that you can put notes in, that you can put post-it note, little sticky notes within the ebook. It's got links to videos and other kinds of learning objects. So there are demonstrations, there are simulations, videos, and all kinds of multimedia to supplement the reading in the textbook itself. Okay, those things are nice ways to bring to life what you're reading about in the textbook. Okay, it's sort of similar to when you're reading something on a Kindle or some other kind of reading device, and you can link out maybe to the Wikipedia page and learn more about some obscure bridge somewhere in France that's part of the story that you're reading. Okay, so make sure you make use of those resources within Launchpad. It's also the place, Launchpad is, where these Learning Curve online quizzes are located. Okay, and I'm about to say a lot more about those Learning Curve quizzes in just a couple of minutes here. Okay, so this is your home, basically, in addition to Blackboard, the home for the courses in Launchpad. Okay, and as it stands right now, the grades for your online quizzes will land in the gradebook on Launchpad. All your other grades will land in the gradebook in Blackboard. Okay, you'll have one place where all your homework points are accumulating, and another place, that is in Blackboard, where your test scores and your clicker points and those sorts of things will appear. Okay. What else is going on within this course? Oh yeah, I have to give tests. I give you 4 tests, and the 4 tests always, as you'll note here, take place on Tuesdays. Somebody tell me in the chat box, why are all the tests on Tuesdays? Is that just because that's the way the schedule worked out, or what's that all about? Why aren't any of the tests on a Thursday? That seems kind of strange. You would think it might break down, 50-50 between Tuesdays and Thursdays. But that's when we meet face-to-face. I'm not going to give you guys online tests in a class of this size. You guys are probably going to end up running at about 250 students. The 930 section will have a full 500. I'm not doing online testing with that many students. So basically it's about once a month, every 4 weeks or so, that we end up doing a test. So our first test is on, you see it on the screen here, Tuesday the 16th of February. The second test will be basically 1 month later on Tuesday the 15th of March. We get the third test just before our taxes are due on April 15th, so Tuesday, April 12th. And then our final is actually test number 4. It's on Tuesday, May 3rd. It's the final, and it is not cumulative. Okay, so test number 4 is the final, and it covers just the last 3 chapters in the course, and that will be on psych disorders, treatment, and social psych. You will not have a separate final on a day during final exam week here in the spring. Once we do the test number 4 on Tuesday the 3rd of May, you're done with Psych 101. Okay, the format of the test is 40 multiple choice questions that are worth 3 points apiece. So if you do the math here, then the tests are worth 120 points each. Okay, we're going to use this ParScore answer sheet for the test. See in the upper right-hand corner here? This guy, yeah, that's the one to bring. It's number F289. It's listed in the syllabus as well. It's sort of the half-sheet wide red one. And then finally, because of the size of the course, there are no makeups offered in the Psych 101 course. So you have to be able to take the test on the 4 dates listed up above. Again, February 16th, March 15th, April 12th, and May 3rd. Get those into your calendars, and those dates, unless something unforeseen were to occur, are not going to change. Okay. Let me say a little bit more about the test in terms of the kinds of questions that I'm going to ask. What you're going to see for the test is that the questions typically are examples and applications of the concepts that we've been talking about. Very rarely do I ask test questions where it's a definition, or it's a name, or it's a date that will help you get the right answer. Instead, what I'll likely do is something like this, right? You would have learned in the first part of the course, for example, that the hippocampus plays a significant role in memory formation. And I might give you a test question that says, Joe sustained a head injury where it was discovered that he had damage to his hippocampus. In which of the following aspects of his functioning would you expect him to have some problems? One of the things listed would be problems forming new memories, for example. Okay, so examples and applications rather than definitions and terms. Does everybody hear that? Okay, if your studying to this point has consisted of making flashcards where you have a term on one side and a definition on the other, that is not going to be enough for these tests. Okay, you could have flashcards with a term, and then on the flip side, I'd have a definition, an example, maybe from class, maybe another example from the textbook, maybe an example from your own life, maybe an example from your favorite TV show or movie that maps onto that concept. Okay, you won't always have 4 or 5 examples, but the more of those examples you have in your memory, the better you're going to do on these test questions. Why? Because it turns out that those things, those examples, are called retrieval cues. The retrieval cues are basically index points through which you can pull information back out of memory. The more retrieval cues you have like that, connected to a term like, let's say, the hippocampus, the better you're going to do on those kinds of questions. Okay. The final thing I'll say about the test in terms of what they're like is that in terms of preparation, I do not give study guides. Please do not ask me for a study guide. A study guide means I'm doing all the preparation for you, and then if I ask you a question that's not listed on the study guide, then you have a fit. So I am not in the business of making study guides. I haven't made a study guide in all the years that I've been teaching. Okay. What I do give you, however, if you look closely at the syllabus, is in the back of the syllabus where the course schedule is, you'll see a list of learning outcomes for each chapter. I've got my syllabus printed out right here in front of me. And so, for example, for Chapter 1 here in the introduction, it has 4 learning outcomes listed. Number 1, define psychology. Number 2, describe the scope of psychology and its subfields. Number 3, identify influential people in the formation of psychology as a discipline. And then number 4, list and summarize the major perspectives in psychology. If you can do what's listed in that list of learning outcomes for each chapter, when you're getting ready for each of the tests, you're going to be in really, really good shape. Okay? Let me stop there for a second. Questions about the tests, the format, the kinds of questions that I tend to ask. All right. Let's venture on and talk about the learning curve quizzes. This is basically homework. The way I think about the learning curve quizzes is that this is what you are doing for homework, and we know that if you do homework, you're going to do better in a course than if you don't do homework. Okay. Question popped in down below. Besides the learning outcomes, what are some other good ways to prepare for exams? I'm going to type in the chat box 2 letters, SI. Anybody know what SI stands for? This is brand new in the fall, and lucky for you, it continues in the spring. SI stands for Supplemental Instruction. We're going to hear a lot more about this on Tuesday when you're going to meet your SI leaders. The SI leaders are previously successful students from this course. There are 9 of them, and each of them each week runs 2 1.5-hour sessions. So you start doing the math, and you've got 9 people offering 3 hours of SI each week. There are 27 hours offered to you of peer-led work on this course. There will be discussions, there will be practice exercises, there will be all kinds of different activities. They're going to tell you more about this when we get together face-to-face on Tuesday. But let me just tell you that the effects of supplemental instruction were dramatic, and I'm going to share some of those numbers with you guys on Tuesday as well. The other best way to prepare for exams, I'm going to say this before we finish up this overview of the course, is to do lots of what's called retrieval practice. Retrieval practice just means doing retrieval of information from memory, and the best way to do that is via actually these learning curve quizzes. So let me use that question to launch into this review of the learning curve online quizzes. There are 2 to 5 sets of these learning curve quizzes for each of the 13 chapters that we cover in the course. The 2 to 5 sets of learning curve activities are worth a total of 10 points per chapter. So if you do the math, there are 130 learning curve points available. 13 chapters times 10 points per chapter. The maximum points that I will award you, however, for learning curve is 120. The upshot is you can miss up to 10 points of the homework and still get all the possible points for this part of the course. Okay? And by the way, because these are worth 120 points, they're the equivalent of a 5th test, right? The tests, if you remember from this previous slide, are worth 120 points. The quizzes, the homework, is also worth 120 points. So effectively, test number 5 is homework, and you should get all of these points. Why should I get all these points? Because to get the points for each of these quizzes, all you have to do is reach the target activity score that's listed for that quiz. It might say you have to get 300 points or 400 points or whatever it is. The best way I can describe the target activity score is it's the point total that you need to clear the level. Okay, that's the way my middle son described this when I had him sit down about 3 or 4 years ago and try out the learning curve quizzes. He said, oh, you got to clear the level. I get this, right? After you reach that target activity score, that is after you have cleared the level, you can keep on answering questions until your fingers fall off. Okay? Why would you do that? Because it's additional practice. And when you do it, it's not going to affect your points. Once you reach the target activity score, you have locked in the points, and all additional quizzing is just retrieval practice and an excellent way to prepare yourself for the test. Okay. There's a calendar link on Launchpad for the scheduled due dates for the learning curve quizzes. So basically when you log into Launchpad on the left side there's a calendar, and that tells you exactly what's due and when. Right from that calendar, you can click on a given quiz and go in and complete it. Okay. Once the learning curve online quizzes disappear, they will not be made available again. So how does this work? Basically, for most of the chapters, these quizzes are due on Sunday night at 11 p.m., okay, after we finish a chapter. So put in your calendar, you'll see it in the calendar on Launchpad, Sunday at 11 p.m., okay, is when they're due, okay. When we have a test on a Tuesday, I actually leave them available to you guys until Monday at 11 p.m. to give you a little bit of extra time and to encourage you to use them as a way to prepare for the test. Okay? But once they expire, they're not made available again. So if you don't get these done, and then you email me and say, Dr. Lamekis, I was visiting my grandma, and she doesn't have a computer, and I forgot my laptop, and Starbucks was closed, and a whole long list of things that kept you from doing the quiz, could you reopen them? My answer is going to be no. And the reason why is I don't want to get involved in that when I have 750 students or more opening and reopening quizzes. Okay, that's why there's wiggle room, where there are 13 chapters worth that you can do, and to get all the points, you only have to complete 12 of them. Okay? Let me stop there for a second. Questions about the learning curve quizzes on Launchpad? By the way, at the end of the semester, the point total that you get for the learning curve quizzes tells me a lot about you. You know what it tells me? Let's say I have a student who has 60 out of 120 of these points, and they're begging me to round their grade up from a C to a C+. They've got 60 out of 120. What does that 60 tell me about them as a student? And you can be brutally honest in what you say, because I'm brutally honest in how I think about somebody that does 60 out of 130, really, that was available to them. Am I likely to round up a C to a C+ for somebody who got 60 out of 120 for the learning curve homework quizzes? You guys are too nice and polite. No, I'm not going to do that. Why not? They didn't put the effort in. Those points were there and they just left them on the table. So this is a great proxy, these points for learning curve, for what you're doing in the course in terms of your homework, right? They're not working hard enough. Thank you, Yusuf. That's absolutely correct. So it lets me know. Just like the clicker points that we're going to talk about now tell me something about what you're doing in terms of coming to class and participating. We are going to make extensive use of the iClicker that you must purchase in the bookstore. Probably the majority of you guys already have an iClicker. We are not using Reef. We are not using other kinds of mobile-based technologies where you can use your cell phone to respond in class. I am not getting involved in having you pull out your cell phones in class. Okay. What we are going to do with the clickers is, in the vast majority of cases, what I call concept check questions, where after teaching you a section of material, I give you test-type questions to see if you understand what I'm talking about. What I love about the concept check questions is that they give you an opportunity, let's say before test 1 in about a month, to see test-type questions for 3 or 4 weeks. Okay? And I will point out the fact that many of these are questions right from old tests. Okay? And if you can answer these well in class and you see the format of these questions, you're going to have a pretty good sense of what to expect when test 1 actually rolls around. We'll do some peer instruction questions where you actually get an opportunity to turn and talk to your neighbor in our classroom. Those are really fun to do. I do some polls, I do some demonstrations, and I also generate attendance points from your responses via the clicker. Okay? The attendance points, I'll tell you, in order to get them, you have to answer all questions but 1 in order to get these points. So that means you have to answer 3 out of 4 questions in a class session, or 2 out of 3 questions, or 4 out of 5 questions, or more to get the attendance points. Okay? The attendance points, as you're going to see in a minute, are 5 points per face-to-face class session. But to get them, you've got to be there and answer the questions. So if at the beginning of class, let's say on a Tuesday, I ask you 2 quick questions about what we had talked about online on Thursday, and you show up 20 minutes late, if you've already missed 2 questions when you show up, you're not going to get attendance points for that class session. Why do you think I do it that way? Why do you think I make it necessary for you to be there to answer all the questions but 1? There's no points connected with online, as I've said in the email and answered a couple times via email as well. You don't get credit if you're late. Showing up to things, even better, showing up on time to things, it actually matters. It's one of the big problems that employers are saying they're having with recent college graduates is they don't show up. Okay, so well in this class, you get points for showing up. Because I know if you show up, you're going to do better than if you don't show up. And I've got some data to show you on that in just a bit. Okay, so what are the points in terms of iClickers? We are going to probably do about 45 questions over the course of the semester. I'm going to choose 30 of those. And for those 30 questions, when you respond, you get 2 points if you get it right. You get 1 point if you get it wrong. And you get nothing if you don't respond. Okay? So let's do the math here. If you go and get every question right all semester long, and 30 questions count, and you get 2 points for getting those right, how many points do you get if you get them all right? All semester long. Here's the math part. So you get 60 if you get them all right. How many points do you get if you were unlucky enough to get every single question wrong all semester long? You would still get 30. Check this out. And if you're attending and answering every question, what's going to happen here? Well, for attendance, you're going to get 5 points for each of 8 days of attendance that is randomly selected by me. We're going to have about 11 face-to-face class meetings. Okay? I'm going to do a random draw of 8 of those 11 days. That's going to give you 40 points for attendance. Do the math here. If you were there clicking in every day and you got all the attendance points, and even if you got every single clicker question wrong, how many points would you get out of 100 here for the clicker activities? You get 70, even if you never will get anything correct, right? That's a C- just for being alive in the classroom, pushing the button. That make sense? Pretty cool, right? Why am I doing this? Is this just to harass you? No. I know that clickers are a terrific tool for increasing active learning in the classroom. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I find out, and probably more importantly, you find out what you know and what you don't know right away. There's this immediate feedback regarding what you know and what you don't know when you're using the clickers. And when I ask students what are the things in the course that are helping them learn, the concept check questions, the clicker questions, have always risen to the top. And they say these things are really, really helpful. Okay? If you don't believe me, let me just show you some numbers. You don't need to write these numbers down or anything, but they're pretty dramatic. Down the bottom here is the overall distribution of grades within a course for a recent semester. 10% A's, 35% B's, 25% C's, 13% D's, and 16% F's. That's overall. Let's look up top for folks who got all of the attendance points. What was their rate of getting A's? 23% versus what? The class overall was only 10%. You more than double your chance of getting an A if you show up every time. Even better, in terms of avoiding bad things, your DNF rate, if you show up every single time, is now 8% versus what? 29%. That's like a 3/4 reduction in your chance of getting a D or an F, from 29% down to 8% if you'll just show up. And by the way, here's the part of this that I love the most. If you don't show up at least 3/4 of the time, look over here. What's the likelihood of getting an A in this class if you don't commit to coming to class at least 3/4 of the time? Tell me in the chat box. Is that going to happen? You have virtually no chance of getting an A if you don't show up for class. Okay? And by the way, in the design of this class, I'm only asking you to show up for class one time a week on a Tuesday. All right? Seriously. I know you might have a busy life, but all I'm asking from you is 75 minutes on a Tuesday to show up and participate. And if you do that, the chances of good things are incredibly increased, and the chances of bad things are incredibly decreased. Everybody got it? What's your plan for Tuesdays at 8 o'clock? Yeah, let's just attend, show up, right? Showing up matters, absolutely. Let me stop there for a second. Questions on any of this as I give you now the total course points here. The 4 tests, 4 times 120 gives us 480. Learning curve, really test number 5, another 120 points. 40 points for attendance, 60 points for the clicker questions, 700 points total. What I like about this is if you think about each individual test, it's 120 out of 700 points within the course. I'm going to pop open the calculator here on my computer and say, what is that as a percentage? That's 17%. We're talking about each test representing just 17% of your course grade. It's basically about 1/6 of your course grade. I taught this class beginning back in the year 2000, and at that time, you know what? I gave 3 tests, and each one was worth 33% of your grade. Okay? So this course has evolved over time. It has definitely gotten better over time, and it has sort of evolved in a way to spread the points out, not just over the test, but also on homework activities, on attendance, and on class participation. Again, the things that I know will help you learn, I'm giving you points for. And if you look at this course, what is that? 220 out of 700 points. 220 out of 700 is for doing your homework and coming to class. I'm doing the math on that. That's 31% of your grade. Has nothing at all to do with doing well on a multiple choice test. Okay? Does that sound good to you guys? Better than 2 giant tests or 3 giant tests, and whatever you get is what you get, right? All right. Any questions on any of this? All right, I'm running a little bit over time of what I plan to do to get you guys oriented, but I want to make sure you guys know what you're doing. I'll have a couple things to add on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, I'll talk a little bit more about something called the research participation requirement for the course. There's a link on Blackboard now that says research participation info. It's a video showing you what that requirement is from the department. I'll point you guys to that on Tuesday. And then as I mentioned, again, on Tuesday, we will hear from the supplemental instruction folks, these fantastic students that have been through the course before, who led these sessions in the fall and basically very much benefited the students, especially those who went to sessions early in the semester. The earlier you go to supplemental instruction, the better. Okay? All right. Any questions? Let me just say two more things. I'll get a little bit preachy because this is my 16th year teaching this class. I know what it takes to do well or what leads to failure in this course. So let me say two things. Number one, let me say that if you struggle on the first test, get help right away. So I'm going to give you two things to keep in mind. Number one, get help right away. Don't wait until after test 2 or test 3, okay, to try to get help. Don't come to me at week 14 out of 15 crying because you're about to get kicked out of the university if you fail the class. If you know that right now and something goes wrong early on, get help right away, okay? The supplemental instruction sessions will be at all different times all throughout the week. There's actually a link on Blackboard now that says supplemental instruction. If you click on it, it actually has a link through now to the supplemental instruction calendar. They're all over the place. The second thing that I want to mention here, and I'm going to put it in all caps, and I'm going to type in the word motivation. Okay, here's the deal, guys. I can offer you all kinds of help, and I can meet with you individually in office hours, and we can offer supplemental instruction sessions and all of that. But if this course doesn't matter to you, if you were to list the 10 most important things in your life right now, and this course is nowhere near the top 10, and I'm not saying it has to be number 1 or number 2, but it should certainly be in the top 10. If it's not, that's going to have an impact on your grade. Okay, and here's my thinking, right? We can offer supplemental instruction. We can offer all kinds of support services to try to increase the likelihood of your being successful in this course. But at some point, you have to do something and meet us in the middle. Okay? If I'm doing all the work, or the SI leaders are doing all the work to help you succeed in the class, you are not going to succeed. You have to meet us halfway, and you have to do your part. Okay? If that sounds preachy or mad, angry or mean or anything, I'm sorry, but you know what? That's too bad, because I've been doing this for 16 years, and I know that this is the number one variable that differentiates those who do well from those who don't. Okay? If it matters to you, there is enough support here from me and from other parts of this course for you to do well. If you don't give a shit about this class, your grade is going to reflect that. Sorry to be so crass, but that's the reality. All right? I'll stop there for a second and get down off of my soapbox. Questions about any of that? Hopefully some of you agree about the motivation piece. Yeah, Eunice, you can type your question into the chat box. And then we'll do about 20 minutes or so of actual talking about psychology. It's up to you whether you have the physical textbook. The e-book has the full and complete textbook in it, so it's the same thing. It's just a question of whether you prefer to have a physical book or not. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, if I am not doing something dealing with my 700 plus students, it's probably something dealing with these guys here. So this guy who's now bigger than me in the picture on the left is my junior in high school, Michael, who is, you know, taking PSATs and getting ready to take SATs and all that good stuff. This was actually at the Durham Bulls Park in Durham back in June last year. These are my other two sons. Ben is the tall, skinny one here. Matt is the somewhat shorter, also skinny one. They are all baseball players and soccer players. So as I said, if I give you a quick response to an email, it's probably because I'm sitting in the parking lot somewhere, picking somebody up, dropping somebody off, watching somebody's baseball game or soccer match or whatever the case might be. So if I'm not doing something with you guys, I'm probably doing something with one of these guys. So that's a big part of my life. Tell you a little bit more about myself. I grew up in Philadelphia. I'm one of 5 boys in my family. I'm the 4th of the 5. I went through high school in Philadelphia, went down to Duke in North Carolina for undergrad, graduated from there in '92, went right from there into graduate school at USC up in Los Angeles. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. That means I'm trained in the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of various different mental disorders. I did a number of pre-doctoral and post-doctoral experiences, most of which were at the VA Medical Center up in La Jolla. I've worked with folks with depression, anxiety disorders. I've done couples therapy. I've worked with folks with alcohol and drug problems. Done a whole lot of things. I started teaching here at SDSU back in the fall of 2000 when you guys were like 3. And I've been teaching intro psych since then. I've been teaching it in this hybrid format, half online and half face-to-face, for almost 10 years now. So it's more than 10 years. You guys are in good shape. I know what I'm doing in terms of making things work correctly. I don't want to sound cocky, but you're in good hands for somebody teaching you this class. Megan's asking, do we need the code that comes with the textbook to access Launchpad? Absolutely. But you could actually purchase them separately. If you didn't want a physical book, you can buy just the access code. Thanks, Alexis. That's helpful. Any questions about any of that? All right. I've been talking for years about pulling in the stuff from the memory chapter right at the beginning of the course, and I'm going to do that today by talking to you briefly about a couple of topics that we'll talk separately about in the section on memory, but I wanted to pull it forward and give these as recommendations for you for how to study effectively. Basically, we've done research on memory that illuminates what you should do to study and be successful in a course like ours. There are a whole bunch of study tips here from Table 6.1 from your textbook. I want to emphasize these 3. Number 1, space out your studying. Build in breaks and spread the study sessions over time. My little guy, Matt, back here, is in 5th grade, and Matt already knows that when he has a science test, let's say next Tuesday, he needs to start studying, well, this is Thursday, he needs to start studying like now, okay? So don't cram. Number 2, minimize your distractions. Focus on the task at hand. Multitasking doesn't work. If I could just put a giant X through multitasking, I'll do it right now. While studying, it just doesn't work, okay? If you're going to study, study. Put the damn cell phone away. Get out of Facebook. Get out of whatever the hell you're doing and focus on your work. And then probably most importantly, test yourself frequently. Okay? Low-stakes feedback gives you an opportunity to learn the material and retain it longer, and it's built right into our course. In the textbook, there are show what you know questions interspersed throughout the chapter. There are test prep questions at the end of each chapter, and there are learning curve quizzes that you're going to do for points anyway. All of those are about this test frequently. The fancy word for this is what's called retrieval practice. That's how you do better. That's how you study and do so effectively. Do lots and lots of retrieval practice. You put the information into memory by coming to class, by reading the textbook, and then you practice pulling it out of memory. Okay? So you want suggestions for how to study? Those are my 3 best ones. Don't cram. Turn off everything else when you're studying, and practice over time. Do this retrieval practice. I will point to you to as well, page 251 of your textbook, which has some great suggestions for how to study smarter, methods for improving your memory. It talks about mnemonics. It talks about hierarchical structures. I know that this is something that they'll be doing in the supplemental instruction sessions with you guys. Make connections between concepts. You're going to see me doing that all the time. Okay? That's how people learn. That's why I teach the way that I do. Give yourself time. Distributed practice is much more effective than cramming. And then down the bottom here, get some rest. We actually know that sleep has a positive impact on memory and retrieval of information from memory. Okay, so I pulled all the stuff forward. We're going to explicitly go over these points again when we get to the section on memory, which is in early March. But on day 1, I think it's important for us to think about how to study effectively for a class like this. And by the way, these strategies are not just for Psych 101. They're applicable to any course that you're taking. Okay. questions on any of that, guys? That's my tip of the day for you right there. All right, so what you can do now is actually open up your notebook or your piece of scrap paper, or get your crayon out if you're going to be taking notes in crayon, because we're actually going to learn a little bit of intro psych here in the next 20 minutes or so. We'll get done right around 9 o'clock. I know on the first day of class you're always supposed to end early. That's what we're going to ultimately end up doing. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing in psychology. Well, let's begin by defining the term. What does psychology mean? Well, it's a term introduced in the 18th century. So this is the 1700s then, as the term first appears. And it comes from the Greek word psyche. Psyche means soul or mind. Somebody remind me in the chat box, what does the ology part of psychology mean? If the psych part means soul or mind, what's the ology part mean? Right, the study of. So literally this would mean the study of the soul or the study of the mind, something about those topics. What's interesting about the history of psychology is that it originally emerges from philosophy. And I think one of the cool things about taking intro psych, if you're a GE person taking this course, or maybe you're a prospective psych major, you actually learn about other topics as well, other disciplines. Okay, so there's a little bit of overlap, especially early on, with philosophy. There's certainly overlap with things like biology and sociology, some other disciplines as well. And these were philosophers who were studying what we might call the phenomena of mental life. Okay, what kinds of things might they have been studying? Well, we were just talking about one topic that they might have been studying. We were talking about memory, right? Or they might have been talking about emotion. Okay, and what they realized over time was, as they went further and further into their exploration of these phenomena of mental life, of things like memory and emotion, that they really weren't doing philosophy anymore. Okay, I know a little bit about philosophy because I'm the fourth of the 5 brothers. The oldest brother and the youngest brother are actually both philosophy professors, so I get surrounded by that when we get together, right? And so there's enough overlap there to see some connections. But over time, psychology basically emerges from philosophy and becomes its own separate and distinct discipline. Okay? So prior to the late 1800s, there wasn't a department of psychology on a college campus. Okay? That doesn't emerge until the late 1800s, and I'm going to give you the date in just a couple minutes. Okay? But that's sort of the story of the evolution of psychology as its own separate discipline. It's the study of the soul or the study of the mind that emerges from philosophy. If we were to ask contemporary folks who work in psychology for a definition of the discipline, most of them would probably agree that this is a pretty good one, and this maps onto the textbook definition for this field. So psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Okay? Well, I mentioned earlier on in terms of studying for the test that memorizing a definition probably isn't going to help you all that much. So let's pull this definition apart a little bit. Number one, it has the word scientific in it. What does that mean? Well, it means we're going to use the scientific method to answer questions as scientific psychologists. Okay? So psychological science involves the use of research methods. We actually have a whole separate section here in part 1 of the course where we go back and hopefully for a lot of you review things about research methods. And we'll talk about things like descriptive research versus correlational research versus experimental research designs. We'll talk about how we measure things in psychology, and we'll address issues related to what's called reliability and validity, right? So we'll talk about measurement approaches. We'll talk about the fact that if you want to measure something like, let's say, I don't know, anxiety, probably just relying on a self-report survey about a person's level of anxiety isn't thorough enough. Maybe you need multiple methods for measuring that variable that you're interested in. So that's what makes psychology scientific. We're using these rigorous research methods to study the topics, whatever those topics might be. If we are studying psychology, what are we studying? Well, we're looking at behavior. Okay? We're looking at things people do. So again, I think of this course as being populated by one of two types of students. One group is students who are taking this as a GE. The other group is students who are taking this course as their first course, maybe in the psychology major. Either way, I'm betting that the vast majority of you are curious about why people do what they do, right? So you could be walking through the mall, you could be sitting in the library, you could be walking across campus, you could be at work, and you observe someone do something. You're like, wow, that's fascinating. I wonder why they are doing that, right? Or you might be trying to understand what shapes your own behavior. You're curious. If you're not curious about human behavior, I don't know what you would be curious about. Okay, there's a richness to what we do in this course that makes it easy to get people energized and excited about what we're talking about. So we're going to look at behaviors, and we're going to look at these things that we call mental processes. What might be involved there? Well, I take mental processes and I unpack it to mean two things for you guys. When we talk about mental processes, we're going to be talking about emotions or feelings on one side, and on the other side, we're going to be talking about thoughts, or the fancy word for thoughts would be cognitions. Okay, so mental processes would consist of looking at emotions, or how people feel about things. And mental processes would also include your thinking, your cognitions, the internal monologue running through your mind. Okay, these are the things psychologists are interested in. We're interested in behavior, right? Stuff that people do. We're interested in emotions, that is feelings, and we're interested in people's thoughts, that is their cognitions. In fact, the way that I approach this with my training in clinical psychology that I referenced earlier is I think about this in the context of what's called a cognitive behavioral model. Cognitive behavioral model. This model basically says that thoughts, if I could just type, I'd be in great shape. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are the three corners of a triangle, and these three things all mutually influence each other. So when people find out that I'm a psychologist, like, oh, dude, are you going to analyze me? You want to talk about my dreams? I'm like, no. Actually, my model is this one that I'm sharing with you guys right now. That thoughts influence feelings, and feelings influence thoughts. Feelings affect what you do, and what you do, well, has an impact on how you feel. Oh, and your thinking makes it more likely or less likely that you might do certain behaviors, and those behaviors that you do may change how you're thinking about things, right? This is, I think, just the ideal way of thinking about what psychologists are interested in, this cognitive behavioral model. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors mutually influencing each other. The fancy word for this is called reciprocity. Reciprocity just means a scenario where we've got these two-headed arrows, where there's a feedback loop. So you might come into this course and say, I'm really fascinated by something like depression, and I want to learn more about depression, Dr. Lemekis. What do you think, Dr. Lemekis, influences something like depression? Well, I'd say I'm pretty darn certain that the way that you think about things influences your emotional state, influences how you feel. I think this arrow is pretty darn important if you're interested in depression. And I'm also curious to see, in my thinking, how behaviors might influence how you feel in terms of your depressed mood. Might it be useful for you to go out and do some pleasant activities, because doing those things might alleviate some of your feelings of sadness? If you're not interested in depression, let's say you're interested in, I don't know, I mentioned before that I did work with folks with drug and alcohol problems. So let's put in here the behaviors of drinking or using drugs. Okay, so drinking or using, that's what you're interested in. Do you think there are certain ways of thinking that make it more likely that someone is going to drink or use drugs? Absolutely, right? When someone who has a problem with drugs and alcohol says to themselves, I can control it, nobody's going to know, I'm only going to use for a day or two, what does that do with the likelihood of them engaging in that behavior? When you say to yourself those kinds of thoughts, tell me in the chat box, what happens with your likelihood of drinking or using when you say things like, I can control it, nobody's going to know, I'm only going to do it for a little bit? You're more likely to go and do it. Well, let's look at another connection here for drinking and using. What about the connection between how you feel and what you do? Do you think, guys, that there are certain emotions over here that might make it more likely that you're going to go out and drink and use drugs? Absolutely, right? If I'm angry, if I'm upset, if I'm depressed, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, we know that those negative emotions are actually the #1 predictors of relapse to drug and alcohol use. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here in some specific terms, but I'm letting you see how I think about how stuff works in the world, right? We are studying behavior and mental processes, and here's what I'm saying. This cognitive behavioral model here is the lens through which I view things in the world as a research psychologist, right? This is how I understand my teenager and try to help him change behaviors and do more of some things and less of other things, right? This is how I help someone who has problems with depression or anxiety or substance use, okay? This is how I get myself to do more of some behaviors and maybe less of other behaviors. I look at the ways I think about things and how that might make me more likely maybe to feel angry versus other thoughts that might make me less likely to feel angry, let's say. Okay, so it's a great lens through which to view and understand what's going on around us. Any questions about that? You guys see how I tend to mark up and make a mess of the slides, right? You're going to get a fair amount of that. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, there are incomplete lecture slides on Blackboard as well. So if you click on the button there, there are incomplete lecture slides really for every chapter all the way through the semester. Okay? So use those if that's helpful to you. It will offload some of the writing and transcribing that you might feel like you have to do. All right, here's the deal. I want to use our last 5 to 10 minutes here to talk about the first of 3 great debates in the history of psychology. Okay? Rather than giving you a bunch of names and dates and have you try to memorize a bunch of stuff, I like to tell the story of the history of psychology by looking at 3 great debates. The first one is going to be between Wundt and the structuralist and James and the functionalist. The second great debate that we will talk about on Tuesday will be between Freud and the psychoanalyst and Watson and Skinner and the behaviorist. Okay? The third and final great debate that we will also look at on Tuesday will be between the nativist and the empiricist. This will be the question about whether behaviors and mental processes are driven by nature or by nurture or some kind of combination of the two. So this is how we trace the history of psychology in our course. So great debate number 1 on one side has Wilhelm Wundt and the structuralist. With a name like Wilhelm Wundt, it's not surprising that he's German. He's a physiologist. Look at that. He's not a psychologist by training, who establishes the first psychology lab at the University of Leipzig in 1879. Okay? So this is the date, I guess it would be, the founding of psychology, 1879. If we do the math, what are we now, 2016? We're almost 140 years out. I guess we're 137 years now as a discipline. You don't need to memorize that date. I'm not going to give you a test question that says, was it 1870, 1879, 1889? Who cares? You can Google that and find the answer in a second. The ideas are what's important here. So he is the guy that's regarded as the founder of psychology as its own separate academic discipline, and his approach was called structuralism. So when they say he espoused structuralism, that means he believed in or he was a proponent of this approach. And structuralism basically boils down to this. It's the belief that your conscious experience, as you're sitting there and listening to me and thinking about things and planning what you're going to do later in the day and so forth, all of that conscious experience can be broken down into underlying components or elements. Structuralism basically boils down to an emphasis on parts. Okay? So if I ask you to remember what you had for dinner last night, okay, there's a part of your brain structurally, right, in terms of the parts here, that is responsible for helping you be able to retrieve that information from memory. Okay? For me, it was orange chicken. That part of the brain is still working. Fantastic. Okay? So the structuralists want you to take what you're doing on a daily basis and take your conscious experience and look for the underlying parts and break things down, okay? And look for the underlying structures that give rise to things like memory or emotion or planning or whatever, okay? On the other side of this first great debate is William James, the brother of Henry James, the author. He writes something himself in 1890, 11 years after the founding of psychology as a discipline, called Principles of Psychology, in which he argues that the structuralists have it wrong. So this is side B of great debate number 1, right? James and the functionalists believe that the mind cannot be broken down into these component elements or parts. They think that the search for parts is wrong. Okay, that's really what this second bullet point is about. They want you guys, those structuralist guys want you to look for parts. Don't do that. Instead, focus on a stream of consciousness, an integrated whole in which you experience the world as a whole. So the stream of consciousness is all about not parts, but the whole. Okay, so as you sit there right now and listen to me, you are seeing things, you are hearing things, you are thinking about things, you're remembering things. You might be smelling something that someone is cooking. And all of those parts of your stream of consciousness are integrated as a whole. You're not just going to smell, or you're not just going to plan, or you're not just going to feel or remember. You're going to do all those things together. So instead of focusing on structures and breaking things down, his approach, the functionalist approach, says we should focus on the adaptive purpose or function of mind and behavior, right? So if we go back here for a second to the previous slide, and we wanted to look as a structuralist at something like emotion, these guys would say, let's find the underlying part that gives rise to emotion. Or they'd say, let's look at something like memory, and let's look at the underlying parts that give rise to memory. In fact, let's run with the memory example for a second, right? What part of your brain, what structure, right, is responsible for memory? Over here, the functionalists would say, don't worry about the parts and don't worry about breaking things down. They'd say, let's look at memory and say, what is the adaptive purpose or function of memory? Okay, what is it good for in an evolutionary sense? So when I see adaptive purpose or function, I start thinking right away about Darwin and an evolutionary model of what's going on here, right? So in an evolutionary sense, what is the advantage for memory? What's the purpose of memory? Tell me in the chat box. If your memory works well, what can you do that someone who doesn't have a good, well-functioning memory can't do? What's the benefit, the purpose, the function of memory? If you did something yesterday, let's say, that injured yourself, you can recall prior information. What can you do if you remember that yesterday it burned your hand when you stuck it in the fire? If you remember that, what does that do for you today? Lex is great. You will not do it again, and as Morgan is saying here, you're going to learn from your mistake, right? You're not going to recreate this problem, okay, this time around. So the purpose or the function of behavior, in this case, in memory, is to learn from your mistakes, as Morgan spelled out in the chat box. Okay, do you see how that's a very different focus from what these guys wanted you to do? The structuralists want you to pull things apart and look for parts, and these guys want you to say, what's the purpose of that, right? We could talk about emotion. What's the purpose of emotion? Well, we could have a long discussion and debate about that, right? Maybe the purpose of emotion is to help you realize what things are important to you and what things are not important to you, right? If something that a person does for you makes you really, really happy, it tells you something about the impact of that person on your life, things like that. Okay? All right. Let me stop there for a second. Any questions about either of the two sides here of great debate number 1? Morgan, are you one of the hatches from San Carlos Little League? I think your dad managed my middle son in his first year of minors, if you are. That name popped up. There you go. Tell your dad that Ben, my middle one, is about to start playing Patriot League. That'll make him feel really old. You can turn negative feelings to positive behavior, right? Yeah, we'll talk more about those kinds of specifics going forward, for sure. Okay? So that's enough for today. I know I'm supposed to stop early, so I feel this, compulsion to make sure we're done before 9:15. We're going to continue on with Great Debate number 2 on Tuesday. So that's Freud and the psychoanalyst versus Watson and Skinner and the behaviorist. Their different approaches to behavior and mental processes. And then we're going to talk about nativism and empiricism, nature and nurture. And this is the biggest thread through the entire course. We're going to talk a lot about nature versus nurture. Right? Do you do what you do because of genes and biology, or do you do what you do because of nurture, your environment? Okay. As I mentioned, we will certainly spend time together on Tuesday going through some more of the specifics about supplemental instruction. It's the best thing I have to offer you to help with your success in this course. Okay. Questions about any of that or anything we talked about today? All right. Oh, Alexis, just before I said that we're done, I have a quick question. You can type that into the chat box. Yeah, Morgan, I think your dad coached my son when he was 8. He was playing up in the minors as an 8-year-old when your dad's team was the A's. That's funny. And your sister was on the team as well, I think. Anyway, before I start just riffing on that, let's see what Alexis has. Difference between structuralists and functionalists. Yeah, so the structuralists want you to focus on underlying structures and break things down, whereas these guys who are functional say, don't break things down, keep things as a whole, and focus on the purpose of behavior. What's the function of it? Rather than what part gives rise to memory, what's the function, what's the purpose of memory? Okay? You'll read a little bit more about this in the textbook as well. They'll introduce some other names. I know Titchener is a name you'll encounter in the textbook, but at a basic level, that's the kind of differentiation I want you guys to be able to make. Okay? Cool. Any other final questions? All right, so here's the deal, guys. When we're done, and Alexis, if you click on the hand again, that will lower your hand so your arm doesn't get tired from being raised so long. When we're done, everybody has to X out of this in order for me to be able to make the recording available for your classmates. So when we're done each time, I'll just remind you, hey, click the X, kill out of this, and then get on your way to the rest of your day. All right? That's everything. You don't have any homework assignments due this weekend. The next thing we'll do is we'll get together on Tuesday morning at 8. We'll run through a review of supplemental instruction, and then we'll finish up this section on kind of an introduction to psychology as a discipline. All right? Thanks for your attendance and cooperation, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye, everybody.